Good morning, everybody. How many for you, is this your last session, or do you have more? Okay, we're trying to baseline who's going to bolt if we don't keep your attention. But thanks so much for being here, everyone. My name is Denise Pearl. I'm part of the Ecosystem and Channels organization of Google Cloud, and I manage a program called Google Cloud Ready Sustainability. So during the show, you guys may have heard about other designations within our partner program: Google Cloud Ready BigQuery, Google Cloud Ready Sovereign Cloud. These are specific designations that we award to partners with domain or subject matter expertise in order to help our customers basically isolate the right partners for the right problem. And so I'm here today joined by Mike and Shane, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves. And Shane, I might go to you first because just want to point out that Deloitte is the first global systems integrator that's joined the Google Cloud Ready Sustainability Program. So I'm super thrilled to be here with you today.
Thank you, Denise.
You want to tell them what you're up to?
Absolutely. So I guess it's still good morning, depending on the time zone. Good afternoon. Shane Moldenhauer. I'm a partner in Deloitte Canada. I lead our sustainability and climate practice specifically focused on transportation decarbonization. And I lead our asset factory, in a sense, for building technologies that apply to our specific client needs. And one of those largest needs is fleet electrification specifically. So really interested to get into that conversation a little bit more and share on what we've been doing.
Wonderful. And Mike, you want to tell everybody
Yeah.
who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. My name is Mike Branch. I head up data and analytics and AI at Geotab. So I've been doing that for the last 6.5, almost 7 years. And just very quickly, Geotab, we process data from about 3.7 million connected commercial vehicles across the globe. So we're looking at about 50 billion records coming in on a daily basis across the whole ecosystem. So really excited to work very closely with the folks at Google and Deloitte towards fleet electrification. On my team, I've got a number of data analysts, data scientists, data engineers, product folks, all looking at, my whole mantra is it takes a village really to raise any data and AI product. So that kind of falls under my umbrella at Geotab.
Wonderful. So what we wanted to share with you guys today is something that we're talking about inside my program, something called ambition loops. And the idea is that customers started coming to, I think collectively all of us, about 2 years ago with a really focused conversation on sustainability. They wanted to do something in regards to sustainability in their organization, but I think they were all asking us, where do we start? What do we do? And so again, we created this program inside Google Cloud Ready Sustainability, and it is this showcase moment to spotlight these solutions, these industry value networks that have come together, technology, systems integration, cloud infrastructure, in order to specifically address a particular sustainability business problem within our mutual customers. And the one that we worked on together with Geotab and Deloitte is around fleet electrification. We heard pretty consistently from a lot of our mutual customers that one of the things they thought they could quickly do was electrify their fleet and change the sustainability position within their organization. And so we wanted to come together today, tell you a little bit about that story, and maybe give you a few moments of introspection about this journey, lessons learned, and things you can consider, right, moving forward. So Mike, I said, a couple of years ago, these people are coming to us. They're like, hey, I've been doing telematics. Now I want to think about sustainability. The CEOs and COOs and CFOs were starting to join these fleet conversations and telling us, the boards are asking us to do something about our business in the sustainability area. How can we do that with our fleet? We've heard this thing about electrification. So what were you hearing? Is it pretty similar?
Yeah, a lot of the whys behind it. There's a number of reasons, right? There's a number of government incentives that exist today, right, to be able to move your fleet from ICE vehicles to electric vehicles. So that typically is a big incentive for these fleets to kind of move things forward. Increasingly, you have sustainability as a mandate across the board, right? We're seeing chief sustainability officers being more and more concerned about how they can drive their prerogatives through. And one of the interesting things is if you look at where emissions are generated from buildings, from industry, from vehicles, the commercial fleets across the globe stand such, they can make such a big impact.
That's right.
A third of transportation emissions come from commercial fleets. And so unlike you or I, I change my vehicle maybe once every 5, maybe 10 years, right?
And some people don't even have them anymore.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And these fleets are changing their vehicles sometimes on an annual basis, and there's a cycle, right? So as you're trying to make that decision of, which new vehicles you're going to purchase, let's make them sustainable. Let's see how you can move towards electric vehicles. So if you look at the ability to actually impact change from a sustainability perspective, wow, what an impact we have with commercial fleets. So there's kind of the tax incentives, the government incentives, there's that sustainability approach, but there's also, from an operations perspective, you stand a chance to be that much more productive as an organization, right? We're seeing even zero emission zones start to come across the globe, where in the future you're going to have one of these EVs. And so you need to start now and figure out how you can make these changes. So these are some of the reasons why we're seeing folks trying to look towards, how can I take my fleet right now and move toward EV.
Yeah, I think though, Shane, like what Mike was just describing, you've got, these companies that have these corporate fleets and they're starting to think about electrification, but that decision is so interconnected with the societies in which we operate, right? Like I can't just decide to overnight electrify unless I've addressed EV charging infrastructure or thought about, like you said, tax incentives. How am I actually going to do all of these things? And I know that this is an area that Deloitte's been keen to help our mutual customers actually lay out that overall thought leadership and plan, obviously bringing in key technology, but I think it's a bit more than that. So do you want to talk about what you guys have been doing in Electrified Fleet?
Yeah, for sure. So if we look at our typical customers, I say they'd be in 3 different points of maturity along the curve on their electrification journey. There are those that haven't started at all. There are those that have kind of dipped their toes in trying to figure out what to do. They bought one token electric vehicle and they've parked it in the garage for 2-3 years. I haven't touched it since because they don't know how to use it. And then there's the other side of it, which is we're really committed. We've done it. We've got vehicles in our fleet. We've got charging infrastructure in place. And that's exactly kind of where Deloitte steps in, is because we have all these clients at different maturity levels coming to us and asking us specifically, we need help along the path, either they started or not. And so we built a tool set leveraging fantastic data that we get from Geotab and our alliance with Geotab, and leveraging the power of the GCP platform to build a tool set called Electrified Fleet. That tool set has been fundamental in bringing together very disparate sets of data, but also creating a source of truth, which really has been the significant key piece for helping them feel comfortable with what we're recommending is actually, they can apply it in practice.
And it's sort of, hate to say it, Deloitte, but auditable, right? Verifiable. I think that's such a key component. Part of the Google Cloud Ready designation, as you both know, having gone through it, it's this validation that the technology, that there's domain expertise, subject matter expertise, in some cases climate science backing it, and that the raw data informing this, or the transformed data that will help these companies make these decisions, is again backed and sort of verified. So we really appreciate the work that you're doing there. I think just for everybody in the audience to understand, I don't think that the telematics data alone is what's going to get us, to full electrification, right, Mike? When we started helping people, like you said, you can't electrify the entire fleet overnight, right? So you were saying that some people they often start with a telematics question. I'm just kind of curious, like we've obviously been in meetings where people maybe have deployed Geotab already, but some of them have not. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you tell customers that don't even have the telematics data to inform it, or they've got other types of telematics data? How do you get them going?
Yeah, oftentimes we always say, like, our mantra is you can't manage what you don't measure. So you have to absolutely start. And one of the things is, like, it's nice to show studies of what other fleets have done, but the only true way that you can know how to transform your own fleet is by starting with telematics, right? And so I think by installing, it might be in a POC, right? You start with a Geotab device combined with, Deloitte's electrified solution. It takes both the data and the interpretation of that data to actually transform your fleet. And what we find is that by understanding how your fleet moves and because each fleet is different, right? You've got fleets in the government space, you've got heavy duty fleets, light duty commercial fleets, they all operate differently. And you want to know what's the potential for not just that archetype of a fleet to transform, but your fleet, your specific fleet. So by having these devices on your fleet vehicles, monitoring how you're moving, how often you're idling, how often you're going on different grades, it's so crucial. I mean, it really does start with the data. And as we've been looking at pulling in all of this data, it's not just enough to say that, I'm capturing speed, right? Or I'm capturing, RPM, or I'm capturing state of charge. Well, at what frequency, at what fidelity? All of these things matter because you have to build a solid foundation of data quality to be able to do something with
That's
it.
right.
Right? I mean, we have our electric vehicle suitability assessment, right? Which Deloitte leverages as a tool in Electrified. And what we do with that is we look at what is the suitability of the vehicles within your fleet to actually move toward electric vehicles, taking into account a whole slew of things, the temperature, the grade of the road, right? The types of vehicles, because not every vehicle can be electrified at this point. But one of the things that's really exciting to me is that, you look pre-pandemic, maybe around during the beginning of the pandemic, 2020, 2021, we did a study with Enterprise Fleet Management.
Right.
And it was this mass electric vehicle suitability assessment. So we looked across their entire fleet of, over 100,000 vehicles. We said, what is the capability for us to electrify this fleet? And at that point in time, it was about 13% of the fleet could actually move to EVs. And that was due to the EV availability, a whole bunch of things. Now, so much has happened since then that we ran it again this year, 45%. Right? So there's such an ability for these fleets to start moving towards electrification, and we're going to see more and more of that happening with the total cost of ownership coming down for these vehicles. But, to your point, the data is certainly one point, the quality of the data, but then it's the interpretation. And that's why working with folks like Deloitte to help our customers through that whole transition phase is so important.
Yeah, I think I'd love to give some metrics because I remember that story, and I think I just watched your CEO present at the supply chain. Just to double click on this, because often we get asked questions about how do we invest in these projects? And I think that what you guys demonstrated, even with 13% of that fleet, there was something like a $30 million operational savings within that org over 4 years. Yep. So I think that there is sort of this perception that investing in sustainability is somehow, not profitable for organizations. And I think what we're seeing is this interconnection between sustainability and operational efficiency. But I think, Shane, one of the things that always pops into my mind when Mike tells these stories is, like I said, in order to make these electrification decisions, it is the vehicle, it's in some cases the load, the type of vehicle, the driver behavior, the temperature. It's also this community charging infrastructure and how do we, that's really a big part, I think, of how it's extending inside Deloitte. You're not just thinking about electrified fleet, but you're thinking about grids and things like that.
There's a couple more cooks in the kitchen.
Exactly. You want to share a little bit more detail because it is a big decision. It's a big interconnected decision, I think, to make that happen.
Yeah, it's a little bit more of a complex question. So a typical fleet transition is my vehicles are aging out or I'm expanding my business. Procurement goes out and buys vehicles with whoever has the vehicle that's the right size, and that's pretty much the consideration. Does it do what I need it to do from a load perspective or a people carrier perspective? And so now you have a situation where you have a client saying, I want to electrify. Fleet procurement goes out and says, we want to buy EVs. It's not that easy.
Right.
There are so many different types of vehicles. You have to consider things like range, but also battery chemistry. You have to consider the operational temperature for where you want to operate those vehicles. And then the charging infrastructure, which often seems to be the downfall of a lot of large corporate customers that want to do it, is because the public charging infrastructure doesn't exist to actually run that fleet. So now you have to kind of roll backwards and consider, well, my facilities management group might have some ideas around what our actual kilowatt usage is at a specific location. So if I go to them and say, I want to install, 10 DC fast chargers, they might turn around and say that'll kill the entire plant's usage. So you have to bring in more people into the conversation than you usually would. And then you have, we've got a top-down approach as well happening where the board is setting goals, saying we need to do X, Y, and Z in terms of sustainability. What does that translate to in the fleet side? And often the response is, well, we don't really necessarily know. We know how much fuel is spent, and we know our vehicles travel this far per year. That's about the metrics that they often have. And it's definitely not something that they can then use and turn around and say, 45% of our fleet's going to be transitioned.
Yeah, I think the real way that this comes together in my mind is just thinking about the user journey, the day in the life, because I think sometimes these conversations are happening with from a Google Cloud perspective. We're talking to Google Cloud users, and you're logging into the Google Cloud console where none of this data exists, right? But in some cases, you're very familiar with BigQuery, which is where a lot of your events go. I know you're connecting into BigQuery as well for the data aggregation. Lots of BQGIS functionality happening there. Everything happens somewhere, so a lot of location stuff happening within BigQuery, which we're very grateful for. And then, of course, you guys, for the most part, Geotab for a lot of years has been speaking to the fleet managers, right? And so, but like Shane's talking about, when you start talking about procurement, board level decisions, et cetera, we really needed that electrified fleet layer, that dashboard where different teams could interact with the data, not have to be an expert in BigQuery or in fleet management. So it's, I would love for you to talk a little bit more, Shane, about like what the user experience is when they log into electrified fleet, like what kind of things, what different types of users would be connecting there, and what types of decisions can they make?
Well, actually what I'll do is I'll tell you a bit about a client story that we have, because it'll kind of translate this or give people a connection point to it. We have a really large customer of ours, Purolator in Canada. It's a last mile delivery company. They are a long-term Geotab customer and have had telematics in their fleet for the longest time. They had a board level decision made that they had to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. I think it was like 60%, or that they had to reduce their, 40% that they had to reduce their fleet.
For their fleet or for their company?
40% for their entire organization, which on paper translated to 60% of their fleet had to be switched to electric vehicles. So now you have, I think it's almost 5,000 vehicles that have to be changed or considered to be changed to electric vehicles. Step one is, which vehicles should I consider? Which could even, because these are not your typical passenger car. They're, class 2 vans, class 3 vans. And the supply chain is really constrained. The charging requirements for these are very difficult to a passenger vehicle. So they came to Deloitte and asked, can you guys support us on our journey? We know that you have a tool set available to do exactly that. So we went in and did a full evaluation of all of their fleets. So we looked at a 6-month period of data, including the ambient temperature. So we did a bit of a season from kind of winter into spring, so we could see the temperature variances for the entire operations across all of the country. And it was really interesting to see, because the initial knee-jerk reaction when we gave them the data was, well, these locations make sense, let's do it. But then when we brought the facilities team in, they said, well, all of these are actually old buildings, they don't have the ability to do that. So now we have to start planning into our facilities team. So you have Electrified Fleet is broken into 4 different personas. You have your fleet operations and fleet procurement core people. You have your sustainability people that consider what are the impacts and which kind of vehicles would have what impact across your greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And then you have your business side, so your financial planning, because one of the outputs is a 7-year procurement plan.
Right.
So which chargers do I need to buy, exactly by when, and how do I kind of space that out with procurement of vehicles? Because some of the DC fast chargers, the lead time is 8 months, but some of these commercial vehicles, the lead time is 12 months. So you almost have to buy the vehicles and then the infrastructure, but neither arrive for a very long time. And so it's been interesting. And then the last one is the pure facilities management side. These are the sites we've identified. This is how many chargers. And then they kind of give us inputs around, this is our current capacity constraint for this location. What can you do with that charging infrastructure? And then how can we fit the vehicles into them as well? So it's multiple different personas. That project was a huge success. We supported them in identifying exactly how many vehicles to transition, and we're happy to say that they're going to be removing about 80,000 tons of greenhouse gases from their fleet over the next few years. So that's
very nice, Jamie.
It's a great story.
Yeah.
Because it tells that it's exactly what we have seen from all of our customers. It's like we have a board level decision. we have a fleet that doesn't necessarily know where to start. They knew what they needed to do. They'd already acquired some vehicles, they were testing it. Purelator is very progressive around their green strategy, but they still needed that support on like, how do I do this by 2030? Because they have ambitions to be completely net zero by 2050.
That's right. Yeah, it is interesting because we see these like public commitments about net zero transition, and I think these board members feel obligated, or C-level executives feel obligated. The consumers, the customers are asking for it, but then when you go back down into the org and try to understand all of the data that's required to actually get you to net zero, oftentimes in old traditional ways of aggregating data or viewing data, the old sheets way of doing everything, what you find out is by the time I could view all the data that I need, I've already missed my 2030 goal. So I think, using the power of cloud to aggregate all of that data, you mentioned, both of you have said about weather.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting to me in the program that I support just how often people ask for weather, because it's such an incredible impact on some of these decisions that we make, both like the efficiency of the vehicles and then the charging infrastructure itself. So yeah, Mike, I think one thing that I'd love to double click on with the fleet managers, if there's any of them in the audience or watching, right, because these are the people that you've been coaching up. Shane just mentioned all of these other external people that are going to be calling them for help. What would you suggest that they think about as they start to grow and update their telematics infrastructure, their fleet management solutions?
Yeah, no, I think, again, the focus on data quality is so important. And, at Geotab, we have, we're connected to, or we have engineers who are consistently reverse engineering, getting the right signals from the EVs that exist out there. We have new EVs being introduced into the market every single day, right? And so for data quality to be really good, you have to be able to extract these signals, whether that come from the vehicle itself or from an OEM cloud-to-cloud connection. So as you're thinking about that transition to EV, to sustainability, think very, very carefully about not just whether you're getting a signal, what fidelity, what is the shape of that? So how good is the data quality that you're getting from the vehicle? That is so paramount, right? And then, yeah, we leverage a ton of Google Cloud to be able to process this data at scale, right? You think about the data coming in from the vehicles, right? GPS data at scale, marrying that and snapping it to the right roads to make sure that you can understand the grade, pulling in temperature data as well too, right? So we've got the ambient temperature coming in from 3.7 million commercial vehicles. So we have hyper-local temperature and weather location, but you're snapping that all to this road network. So we leverage Google BigQuery, BQGIS, and all this stuff, and pull that all together.
I think BQML as well.
BQML as well too. Yeah. But yeah, the whole stack is really built on GCP, Kafka, Kubernetes to pump everything into that BigQuery platform, and then really excited about a lot of the work being done now on Vertex AI and how we're taking that to the next step in leveraging generative AI.
Yeah, there were these questions, I think, coming up, when we start to think about Gen AI, the ability to actually inspect this type of telematics data and ask questions like, which one of my vehicles are, the largest producers of carbon emissions or things like that. And then you can sort of, again, I think one of the things to take away from this value network of the people sitting on the stage here is, again, directly being a BQ consumer, hearing things like BQGIS and BQML, some of these terms I think for fleet people could seem a little abstract. So it's so wonderful to have a company like Geotab that's just built on top of it, produce this My Geotab layer so that you can actually just see the things you need to see, right? And you don't have to be necessarily an infrastructure expert.
And the partnership, that's why I think these industry value networks, the partnership amongst the three here has been what's allowed us to accelerate, right? I think any one component wouldn't have allowed Purelator to achieve that dream, right?
Absolutely.
But you have all three components together in that value, that's power.
So I'd love to just kind of, and we want to save some time for questions from the audience, but I would love to ask you both, like, again, maybe if you were to give one or two pieces of guidance, Mike, or just lessons learned from your point of view.
I think don't be afraid to start now, right? And start with collecting data, because you may not be able to transition to EVs as a fleet right now, just because of vehicle availability. But what you can do is start your journey towards transportation decarbonization. And that may come from, reducing idling in certain areas by changing driver behavior, right? On maybe Class 8 heavy-duty vehicles where the charging infrastructure isn't there necessarily to support that. But yeah, start now. Make sure that you're collecting the right data, because that's going to inform all of your future decisions. And there's nothing stopping you from starting now just because the EVs don't necessarily exist for your fleet. There's other ways that you can move towards transportation decarbonization.
It's such a great way to frame that up, because I was actually walking over to the Moscone this morning with a gentleman, and we were talking about sustainability work in general inside companies. And just like sometimes it's a team of one. Yesterday I was on the stage with the Chief Sustainability Officer from Palo Alto Networks. And we were talking about them collecting sustainability information across their org. And I said, well, Vince, your team. He goes, what do you mean? I don't have a team, it's me. But he said, I have these people throughout the organizations, which, logistics is going to be one of those contributors. He said, I have this community that's been established across the org, and they're now starting to work with their data with this lens, right? And what we see, which is really fascinating amongst, again, just I think our community of sustainability leaders, people in our companies want to help. So I love what you said. We recently did a Harris poll inside Google across 1,500 executives specific to sustainability, because I think one of the other questions that we're getting right now is, with all the economic headwinds, everything that's going on, are people still working on sustainability? Does it still matter?
Yeah.
And I think what we saw was, although sustainability went down in ranking, it's still in the top 3. The other interesting thing that came out of that study was that they may not say sustainability. They say supply chain resilience. They say adaptability, right? They say viability. And so, just thinking about that as we show up together and talking and servicing all of our mutual customers, I think we have to be listening for those other keywords. And then, like you said, individually looking at the data that we have and thinking about how we can apply it to these new use cases. Shane, I'd ask the same from you. Like, what lessons learned would you offer to everyone?
I think Mike's on the right track, which is start now. Collecting good data is going to help you, because the source of truth really is the critical piece that gets buy-in from the rest of the business. Talked about the auditability assurance piece. Like, knowing what is being recommended starts with having a good set of data. We often find a lot of our clients, you talk about the CSO being a team of one, but having champions around him. And I think it's going to be the same for the journey of decarbonization. That people will start growing, but they all will have disparate pieces of data to input, kind of bring to the table. But I think it starts with a good data set. It starts with, and honestly, like, I've been working with Geotab for a good number of years now. Fantastic product. It does stand above the rest in terms of data quality.
Right.
And so for a company like ourselves that needs to have that trust, it's really good working with a partner that we can trust the data all the time and know that what's coming out is literally what happened. So the vehicle did do this exact motion. These were the emissions, this was the odometer and the external temperature. So building platforms on top of that for us also. But start now, start with the data, collect some information. At the very least, to your point, you can start with other decarbonization activities like idle reduction, driver training programs. Those are gonna move the needle.
That's right. And we'll collect all the reporting against that in one tool. Yeah, the final statement out of that survey that happened was when we followed up and said, okay, it's still important. They said, we're a bit hesitant to come out with these public commitments like we used to be, because we did it. We didn't have the data to support it. We got some backlash from our consumers, from our customers. So now we're a little nervous about stepping forward. And the last question that I think Google really reinforced, well, what can we do to help? And they said, give us tools to measure it. Yep. Give us tools where we can go verify it. And I think aspirationally that ask makes sense. I also think what we're seeing from a regulatory structure is sustainability data and financial data, they're intersecting. Yeah. And the same obligation of how you do financial reporting and how you do sustainability reporting, they really are coming together. So like you said, one of the stories that Mike shared with me about the different fidelity of Geotab telematics that I love was when we talk about driver swerving. because I used to commute a lot, right? And you were like, hey, if you had another telematics provider, that person could be swerving in the road, right? Going 80 miles an hour swerve, but come back in and have really appropriate behavior. If you don't have the right telematics that's clicking out, on a second by second basis, connected to all those systems, you would have missed it.
And you know what? It seems so maybe simple and trivial. Oh yeah, what if I miss a couple points here and there? But it makes a huge difference.
Yes.
Especially
across
when you start
3.8 million
exactly
vehicles.
adding this stuff up at scale. And so the way that we, just for those who aren't aware, the way we kind of tackle our data collection is through curve logic, right? So we're not necessarily capturing data every second or every 2 seconds or every 5 seconds. It's on these error bar thresholds, right? So if I'm driving down the highway or the freeway, at a specific speed, I'm going to be collecting fewer points. But if I happen to like jam on the acceleration pedal and overpass, and I'm collecting more points along the way. So it's based very much on these error thresholds, which are so critical for data quality, and especially in this world of generative AI, where data trust and data quality is so important. People want to know what actually did happen. People are making decisions, purchasing decisions, firing, like there are some serious decisions people are making based on this data, and you have to get the quality right. So to that point, we do spend a lot of time on data quality from the vehicle all the way through to the myriad of pipelines that we have running to get the data that is required to make these decisions.
And if you look at the broader impact on sustainability and carbon inventory that companies, or GHG inventory that companies have to now submit to regulators, the SEC, whoever the body or local tax authorities are, these things matter.
That's right.
Like if you get it wrong, there is actually going to be a fallout if it is not correct. So,
I've told everybody, I feel like we're at that Sarbanes-Oxley moment for us in sustainability where it's starting to become very legitimate. But you guys, thank you so much for all of the information that you provided. I hope these were great examples. I'd love to leave a few minutes for questions here. Before I let you stand up though, I did want to let you know there's a survey. We'd love to get your feedback, love to hear if these stories matter to you, if these ambition loops that we're describing, right, if you can take action on them. So please provide us some feedback. But if there's any questions, and I will tell you that you got to lean into that mic for us to be able to hear you. So we'd love to see, Chad, I know I can always count on you for a good question. We don't get it. Thank you so much. Lean in there, I'm not kidding.
Hello. You gave an anecdote of a company who was looking to electrify, and you initially gave them a number, I think it was in the low teens, you said, and then later you revised that number to be in, maybe it was the 40s.
Yep.
Can you elaborate more on what led to that large increase in the recommendation? Was that battery capacity or vehicle availability?
Primarily vehicle availability is what led to it, right? And so
it isn't even specific to that company. Would you say that's just a larger trend for across all companies?
I think we're seeing that as a larger trend. So what we did, it wasn't just for that company. So if you look at enterprise fleet management, it's across the entire space. Over 100,000 vehicles went into that study. So it's not just one customer, but it's across the entire kind of hold of vehicles there. And so from about 2020 to 2023, that's because of vehicle availability, we were able to see that increase. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, good morning. So just quick comment, maybe not necessarily question or maybe partially question, is, and you brought up the point, like start small, maybe with idle time reductions based on telematic data or maybe route planning, or, there's dozens of ways. But the other thing that you didn't really hit on, and I think is also important, is the scopes 2 and 3 reductions by making the choices you'll make with electrifying your fleet, or maybe even, going hybrid for your fleet. So, because those, especially if you're going to talk about reporting and meeting sustainability goals for your organization, full life cycle emissions, for example, or your scopes 2 and 3 are going to also make an impact, and that will, the decisions you make on your fleet will impact your scopes 2 and 3.
Yeah, and it goes along, thanks for the question, it goes along the line of the broader sustainability goals that institutions have. So look at a company like Walmart. A lot of their providers, they're now considering their suppliers' scope 2 emissions as their scope 3 emissions, and they're actually going with providers that have the ability to give them that data as a source of truth and really be able to tell that story around how the supply chain impacts somebody like Walmart's scope 3. So yes, within the work that I do a lot with other carbon inventory programs, stop thinking about electrification, decarbonization, whatever it is, as just a pure cost center. There is a profit center, not just necessarily monetarily right now, but if you look at EV operations over time, cost of operating an EV fleet reduces over time. But there's other things, carbon taxes in the future that might impact you as well. But there's a brand reputation that goes with it as well. If you start making that commitment to decarbonize your fleet's often the first thing that people see about you. You're on the highways, you're driving around, you have branded vehicles. That impacts your shareholders' view on you as well. So yeah, scope 2 in terms of your business and how you operate that fleet, but scope 3 in terms of how that data impacts others is significantly important as well.
I might add, oh, go ahead, please.
With larger and with larger organizations, scope 3, for example, on an individual level is very small, but when you get a large fleet, that scope 3 is going to add up very quickly and certainly should be part of your reporting.
Yeah, I think one of the things to take a look at potentially as well, and again, partnership with Deloitte, is from a Google perspective, we are also thinking about just modernization of the grid, because a big part of the dependency here is like, just do we have the grid infrastructure to support it? Yeah. Google itself is like, we're in our 3rd decade, right, of working on climate action, and we were really focused on data center efficiency. So, obviously we went 100% renewable, but now we're working towards carbon free. And what Google is thinking about is, like, in order for our data centers to be truly 7 by 24 by 365 green energy, we've got to now inject capital perhaps into these areas where our data centers will be, right, to build out solar, wind, geothermal, et cetera. We have to work with the utilities in order to green up the accessibility to this energy. And this all impacts the charging infrastructure, which is a dependency for you. So again, I think within Google Cloud, at least within our program, we're bringing some of those energy, providers, the FlexiDAOs, the REN Energies, the electricity maps, level 10s, right? All of those are participating in Google Cloud Ready Sustainability as well, and will be showing up in like future solutions, that are coming out from Deloitte around like electrified grid and things like that. So they'll all come together, like Shane said, because I think I've had a lot of chats here at the show about scope 3. Really hard. Yeah. Really, really hard. And I think we just have to address it with humility. And I think that the number one thing I take away is that we all, as individual organizations, clean up our act around scope 1 and scope 2. Then we all clean up each other's scope 3, right? So great question. Thank you so much.
Just to build on that a little bit as well, too, you also have to look at the power of this data at scale. So some of the work that we're doing within our Geotab Intelligent Transportation Systems line of business is taking this aggregate data at scale, anonymized, working with folks like National Grid to look at the confluence of, okay, well, I need to understand where the high voltage power lines are coming in. I need to understand truck movement patterns to be able to properly position charging infrastructure for the future as well, too. So it's not only at the individual fleet level, but now how do you take this data at scale, aggregate, privacy compliant, work with, the grid to be able to figure out what does that deployment of the charging infrastructure need to look like? So very excited to continue to work with Deloitte.
And this is where all the big query nerds in the room are like, I could join this table with this table with this table, right, Chad, and ask that question. So thanks so much. So I see my friend Nick, right?
Yes.
Yes, how are you?
Can you hear me? I wanted to ask if you could speak a little bit more to how you bridge the gap between board or executive mandates and individual employee buy-in, and in particular, what role data and analytics plays in that?
Such a great question.
It's a great question.
I'll
take one stab at it. So one of the things that I've always been a huge proponent of is like, get the data out of fleet, right? Like, so often our customers are the fleet managers, and our mission is to get it outside of the fleet organization and to the board level to make sure that the right decisions can be made. There are a few tactics from a technology perspective that we're using to try and enable that. And the goal is to get it into the systems, the business systems within those organizations that those executives rely upon on a daily basis. So Simple things that you can do from a technology perspective is make sure it's easily integratable, right? So, we've got data connectors that take that data from our fleet platform and move it into all sorts of BI platforms that the organization is already using, so that those C-suite executives who are looking at these dashboards or who have these dashboards displayed to them, they're not 5 steps removed from the data which exists in the fleet platform, right? So getting it into the enterprise data strategy for these larger organizations is one thing that's going to highlight the importance of the data at the C-suite. That's only one step, but that's something that I've found has started to resonate more and more.
And Nick, I think, I'll just reinforce what I keep saying. I feel like, obviously I run a program that's called Google Cloud Ready Sustainability. And I think a lot of times when C-level executives hear that, they put me in a certain category. The projects that I'm going to work on, the impact that we're going to have, the things that we're doing. But when you approach them and you start to talk more about long-term viability of the organization, right? And it depends on what company you work for, but I would say that across the board, every organization that we talk to is concerned in one way or another about raw materials for their products. They're concerned about logistics. They're concerned about, climate impacts to their organization. And so I think we collectively as a group need to get better at translating that sustainability actually means operational impact to these businesses, right? And it's people like you that live and breathe this, right? That know what's happening within your org. You're bringing a sustainability lens to it, and you're providing that translation. If you can take what Mike said about the data that exists in the fleet, put it into a business system, and actually produce a report that says, hey, we could potentially save millions of dollars by electrifying our fleet, through, operational savings, carbon emissions reductions, or whatever. That to me is a sustainability story. But what an executive hears there, right, is like operational efficiency. I'm performing for my shareholders, et cetera. So that would be some of my feedback. What about you, Shane?
Yeah, I think, getting the data out is critical. Not just putting it into BI platforms, but also putting it into your ERP systems to be able to start having people held accountable for some of the commitments that they're making is key. There's some great connectors. Deloitte's built as well for SAP, Oracle, Workday, those kinds of platforms. That definitely can support that. At the end of the day, there's a lot of upskilling that has to be done and education that has to be done on what this data means and what the impact is across businesses for sustainability, for capital performance. There's a bunch of different areas, but yeah.
Great question, Nick.
Thank you.
And Chad. Uh-oh, we're all in trouble, right?
Thanks, Denise, for outing me for a question. So I do have one, and we've talked a lot about some happy things like, hey, this is the
Lean in, Chad.
The operational efficiency that you get, or the savings that you get, sustainability gains that you get. But I wanted to ask about some unhappy things, because when you think about the energy transmission lines all the way from generation to consumption, like transmission lines, energy distribution systems and whatnot, if you create a lot more demand by positioning a network of charging stations around, now the energy companies have to supply those, and then the transmission supplies have to supply the energy companies, et cetera. So where does the story get sad? Again, like are there bottlenecks between energy generation and consumption? What's the next problem that we need to be thinking about? Assuming we've solved all of the stuff that we've talked about here, which we haven't, but what's the next one that we got to worry about?
Grid resilience.
Yeah, and I think, Chad, it's such a great question because, like I said, when we did start to think about, going out and making recommendations about electrification, it naturally led us to exactly what you're talking about. We could, in some cases, be setting people up for a non-satisfactory experience because they actually can't get to electrification, right? Just simply because of the grid infrastructure. But inside Google, as you know, we've been working on 24/7 clean energy. And we didn't do that alone. We've been working with various partners, again, thinking through partners that do actual, in some cases, the first place to start, in my mind, to actually make more energy available full stop is probably just to optimize what we're already using. So going into major energy intensive assets and evaluating them again through data and saying, can I just get them to perform better? Use less energy, which frees up energy for the rest of us. That's point one. The second point is maybe start to talk to the utilities in a different way about how they collect data, meter data management, et cetera, about how utilities are actually working. A lot of them don't even understand the scope or the requirements of the brown-green balance on the grid. So maybe optimization of these high energy intensive assets, work with the utilities to get better visibility into the brown-green balance, and then start to move people onto this conversation about renewables. I think that Google's journey is a great one for people to watch because we had that problem, right? Like we wanted to make our data centers, we wanted to have this amazing story about energy reduction and potentially 100% renewable, but when we went out and looked at where our existing data centers were and where we wanted to build, it didn't exist. So Google actually had to go out and do capital investment, actually support the build out of solar, wind, geothermal to support our own facilities. And part of that, frankly, wasn't just capital infusion, it was policy. We had to go work with local policymakers to make sure that if we actually dispatch this green energy, could we buy it? Again, interconnection with the utilities. And then I think once that happens, you start to understand, okay, I've got the renewable energy sort of build out happening, which is accelerating. And I think you guys are tracking a lot of that at Deloitte. And then the final piece is now I start acquiring the renewable energy and we start to get that balance. And so outside of this work, although they're interconnected, we have this carbon-free energy journey happening with a bunch of other partners that are feeding into something like Electrified Grid from Deloitte, which should hopefully continue the story, Chad. But it's such a great one that you raised, and it goes to the scope 2 and scope 3, right? Scope 1 we may be able to solve for. I can't solve for scope 2 until I start cleaning up the grids like you're mentioning. So excellent observation, and hopefully that a bit more detail, is provides you a bit of hope that we're thinking through it. But Shane, I know, like I said, I see Jamie in the audience. This electrification of the grid is a big deal for you guys.
Yeah, it's a huge concern for us. Again,
the cleaning of the grid, I should say.
Of the grid. Well, cleaning of the grid resilience, ensuring that as we make recommendations for electrification and decarbonization, we don't inadvertently actually create a problem.
Right.
And so we've been working tirelessly with some of the local utilities across Canada and in the US as well to understand where they are. And so grid planning happens 50 years out. But if you look at the curve for technology adoption and electricity usage, we're actually a little bit disconnected from those 50-year plans. And so we're trying to support them in that aspect of let's bring multiple data sets. The ITS platform with Geotab is a fantastically important one because it gives us an understanding of transportation corridors. Once you start getting into DC fast charging of heavy trucks, that's going to put a massive draw on networks. And usually there's not a significant supply along large transportation corridors because there's gas stations. You don't have to think about that. So all of these pieces inform a new asset where we've developed called Electrified Grid, which does exactly that, takes into consideration things like heat pump adoption, renewable use, transportation electrification, and helps them plan from the endpoint, so building endpoint all the way back into the distribution center and transmission network to figure out where are the failure points.
That's right.
That will occur along the line.
Well, you guys, this has been a fantastic conversation. Full disclosure, these are two of the best partners that I work with every day, and so it's great to be on stage with you. Thank you so much for the audience participation. We hope you enjoyed the content and enjoy the last day of Next. Thank you.
Thank you.